few more waiting in the lobby, it says here.
Good morning, Chair. Councillor Bramble.
Right, I think we should start. So, Alex, you said you've started recording, yeah?
Yeah.
So I just to reiterate that. So welcome to the Integrated Commissioning Board. Firstly, meeting in its capacity as the local Outbreak Board. Just to let you know that we are recording this. The first time we recorded it and posted it on YouTube, wasn't it, Alex? I think not.
Yes.
YouTube, wasn't it? It was the last meeting, and we intend to continue that. So I just wanted to check with people that they're happy with the fact the recording is, rather than just for the minutes and then destroyed, is actually kept and posted up on YouTube. Just any objections to that or concerns? I've got a hand up. I can't see. Oh, the hand's gone down. Okay. Right, thanks very much. So welcome, everybody. I haven't received any apologies. Alex, have you got any for that's come through this morning?
No, none received.
Not from the members or attendees? No? Okay. Well, as ever, I'll endeavour to take questions as we go along, and please put things into the chat and I'll try and pick those up as well. I'll always go to members first for comments and things, and so, depending on timing, allowing bringing others in when we can. So we have 50 minutes for our first section, then tend to have our 10-minute break and then continue with our second section of the meeting. So in terms of the local outbreak board, we've got some, well, we don't have any questions from the public submitted in advance. We've got some minutes. Anybody have any comments about the minutes? For accuracy? No. Okay, thank you very much. There was one action there which was noted in the minutes for Nina to complete, Nina Griffith, which that has been done. So there are no further actions on an action tracker. So can I just quickly just check with the City ICB to approve the minutes and the note that that action's been done, and similarly with Hackney as well, please. If you could nod. Thanks, honours, thumbs up. Thank you, nodding, and thank you.
Great.
So let's move on. Vaccination update, Richard Ochable. I know we had a paper yesterday evening, but you were going to talk to that. For the next sort of, we have about 20 minutes on this piece. Over to you. Oh, you're still on mute, Richard.
I'm off mute. Morning all. Thanks very much for inviting me. Hopefully you've had a chance to look through the update I circulated last night to go through some of the headline figures. I think practices are going great guns calling patients, recalling them and recalling them. We've had declarations from all practices that patients have all been offered at least three invites. So that is great assurance. Obviously, we're still working to the national deadline of having cohorts 1 to 4 vaccinated by the end of this week. Last night we heard in the news that there are still a missing 2 million. There's a higher proportion in City and Hackney, and that is due to people declining or deferring. There are still a lot of people who haven't made their mind up yet about wanting the vaccine and are currently declining it. The latest headline uptake figures for people aged 80 plus, Hackney registered, uptake is 63%. That's higher for the patients registered with the Neiman practice in the city, and that's 83%. Uptake in the 75 to 79 cohort is 65% for patients registered with Hackney practices, and again that's higher in the city at 82%. And then for the cohort number 4, which is people aged 70 to 74 and people who are clinically extremely vulnerable, uptake is 54% for people registered with Hackney practices, and again it's higher for Neiman patients at 80%. I must say this data changes on a daily basis. It's a little bit old now. The latest data available to us is from the 6th of February, and I know at the end of last week and all through this week is an incredibly busy week. There's a lot of activity going on. So we do expect those numbers to improve, although we do recognise that there are still, there's a lot of strong resistance out there, people deferring and declining. We're on target to have our housebound and care home patients vaccinated by the end of the week. Sadly, regrettably, somewhat understandably, given the feeling in the wider community, there's a fair proportion of housebound patients declining. These patients are being contacted by their GP to have a conversation to see whether people's minds can be changed, but it's inevitable that not everybody is going to want this vaccine, particularly, well, not before the deadline of the 14th of February. Patients in cohorts 1 to 4 will continue to be offered the vaccine. It's not, we're not going to stop inviting those patients, but we do need to continue working through cohorts 5, and we opened up invitations to people aged 68, 69 at the start of this week. And we're expecting formal confirmation that everybody will be, certainly in North East London, will be inviting patients in cohort 5 from next week onwards. We are trying to do what we can to, as a CCG, to promote the 2 community pharmacists that are offering COVID vaccinations, Clockwork and Bees Pharmacy, but we know at this point in time uptake is very low. And we have an event for the Carady community, run by the Carady community, but operating out of John Scott, and that's happening Saturday night and possibly into the early hours of Sunday morning. Then in the briefing I sent round, there's quite a lot of description detail about the targeted work that is happening with communities, which I hope you find a helpful illustration of the work that's going on. Clearly really important, and more work on that in that space is needed. And I think that's what I want to say by way of my talk to the paper. I'm very happy to take questions.
Great, thanks, Richard. So I've got a few hands already popping up, actually, so I'll go to those first. I've got Haren, I think, was first, and then I've got John Jake and Councillor Chris Kennedy.
I just want to make a point as a GP.
Haren, can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Can you not hear me? I'm not muted. So
No, you're quiet. If you just get a bit closer or something to the mic.
Yeah. Okay. So I agree everything what Richard has says, but though we have got a high number of declines, we shouldn't be worried about it, because gradually they are changing their minds after they see their friends that had it, they're well and alive, and then hear about the bad stories of people going into hospital. So there's a slow change. So we should not compare ourselves with the national numbers. Our numbers will be catching up slowly, not those straight away. So I think we should be fine.
Thank you, Haren. I agree. I think uptake will improve over time, but we're certainly going to look relatively low when it comes to the end of the 14th of February. But it's something we need to continue to support and encourage the community to take up.
I think, and also there's one thing to say about that when it's reported on the 14th of February, the data does take a little while to get into the places where it's then extracted from to be reported, a few days. So our numbers will know where we are on the 14th, 1 or 2 days later. But I agree, when we move into other cohorts, it's absolutely fundamental as part of the planning is to continue to attend to the people in the cohorts 1 to 4 who are gradually overcoming their hesitancy, and then offer them vaccine in an appropriate environment which suits them best. So, John, you're next.
Thank you. Yeah, a couple of questions. Firstly, on learning disabled people, how are they being supported to take the vaccine? My brother is actually got Down syndrome, and you cannot give him an injection. You have to figure another way of actually kind of getting to him. So it's kind of really important that we kind of think about how we deliver the service towards those people. On the second point, you made a really good point, Richard, about kind of the challenge of speaking to some of the communities and getting the communities really involved in this. We picked up something yesterday, which I'll be sharing with Public Health, a WhatsApp message being shared by Black people that says that the vaccine is essentially being given to people, and it will be and that once you have the vaccine, you'll be activated to give you COVID at a later date. So there's the subtlety and of these kind of undermining of the vaccine program is very concerning. So it's really important that we actually really focus on the support of the Black community and have conversations with them and listen to them. Really properly listen to them, because I'm concerned that a lot of this is playing out in terms of kind of inequalities for these people, and they're very concerned about what they're seeing. So we need to listen to them. So there is an event next week. I'm very pleased about to tackle vaccine hesitancy, but I am concerned that, you know, I'm a bit concerned that people think this might just will slowly but surely edge into this community. There is resistance, and we need to work with these communities to make sure that we can overcome that resistance.
Thanks, John. So there's a separate work stream looking at people who need additional support to take up the vaccine, including people with learning disability, homeless patients, etc. So that's work in progress. People with learning disabilities are coming into Bocking and John Scott to be vaccinated, and where those people live in the community in care homes, they can be vaccinated there too. And we know that there are some patients who will it will be very who need a lot of extra support to get them vaccinated, and that is being worked through with behavioural specialists, etc.
I promise not to keep chipping in, but the practices do temporarily put people on their housebound lists when they know that somebody really does not want to go somewhere to have a vaccine and would only really tolerate it there. So that also happens. And I know the examples of people with learning disabilities often can fall into that category.
That's true, Mark. That's a good point. Yeah, we've probably seen an extra 200 people added onto our housebound list as on a temporary basis, and they're being vaccinated in their homes.
Right. So, John, thank you. Jake?
Thanks, Chair. Just to build on John's point, so we've been working with Claire Small, Eva, and colleagues in the council to plan a series of events. We will be hosting a specific event for African and Caribbean heritage communities next Thursday evening. I think I might be chairing it, which is not an easy job. I think to build on the comments that John made about hesitancy, I mean, wrapped up in all of this is a sense of mistrust, which springs from, you know, decades of what people perceive as structural racism. But I think what we're trying to do is to actually find respected community leaders to be on that panel. Sandra's kindly agreed to take part in the event as well. I think my point is more that we can't just see this as a few events that we do just to get people to take the vaccine. I think we have to see this as a much longer term set of conversations, because the level of mistrust it's almost in the DNA. In fact, it is in the DNA for many. My second point was asking any data people whether there's a tipping point at which point there's a sort of max. Once you get to a certain percentage of people taking the vaccine, we can be less worried about those who are simply never going to take it. Is there a threshold at which, you know, once you get 75% of the population vaccinated, then actually the vaccine can't, you know, carry on wreaking destruction? I don't know if anybody's got a figure, or if there's a local figure we're working to.
I've heard 55%, but I'm looking at Mark.
Well, I don't know that there's a figure's been established yet, but we do know that some of the follow-up research of the cohorts who've had vaccination early, the AZ paper that came out a week or so ago, which did show reduction in transmission, because obviously all the original research was all done around preventing serious illness and hospitalisation. with the expectation and that it would, once you get enough people immunised, reduce transmission. So that looks like it's now being shown to be the case. But in terms of setting a figure, I'm sure that's being addressed. There may well be some figures nationally being developed, but then you have to think about what the local situation is and what's appropriate. So I think it's an evolving picture, that, Jake, but I think people are certainly very much on it in terms of getting the data and the information and research done.
Yeah. Sandra might have a
Yes,
view as well.
indeed, Sandra, you've got your hand up. Thank you, Sandra. Come on. You're on mute.
Oh, my microphone just took a really long time to come on. I had actually switched the button. You're absolutely right, Mark, that the research is still ongoing about what percentage of people need to be vaccinated to reach what we call herd immunity, actual herd immunity, as opposed to some of these other concepts that people think of herd immunity. And what we mean by that is where you've got enough people immune, usually through vaccination rather than through having had the infection naturally, so that the infection stops spreading, which is not the same as the vaccine working in a way that makes you less liable to transmit the infection once you've been vaccinated. So the current figure that people are really working to is about 80%, but we don't know. For most vaccines, it's much higher than 55%. But what we normally expect in terms of a trial data to say that a vaccine has enough sufficient efficacy to go forward is 55% or more. But that's not the same as herd immunity. That's saying, did it work or did it not work, as opposed to are enough people in the community now immune for the infection to stop spreading. With the different variants and different levels of infectiousness, that might change. So we might have needed a much lower proportion of people to be immune to the original wild type virus than we would need to be immune to the B117 or the Kent variant, or to the B1351, or the, as it's called, the South African variant, or the P1 or the Brazil variant, all of which are much more easily transmissible than the original wild type one. So the jury is still out, but it's a lot more than 55%, and probably more like 80 or possibly more. If you just think about it in terms of flu, we are always aiming for well over 70% of people to be vaccinated, or with something that's very highly infectious like measles, we're going for over 95%. So we're probably looking at something in between those two. And just to respond to that point about the AstraZeneca vaccine and whether it really prevents the virus being transmitted, that is very, very limited evidence and very early evidence. And I certainly wouldn't bank on that and say that now that all the people who get in the AstraZeneca vaccine can no longer transmit the virus. And as I always do, I will use this opportunity to reinforce that whether or not you've been vaccinated, you have to continue to, with all the measures, that hands, face space, ventilation, and making sure that, while we're in lockdown, you're complying with all of the restrictions, but whenever that comes, we come out of the lockdown, that you continue with hands, face space, whether or not you've been vaccinated, because we still don't know that you can't transmit it if you've been vaccinated.
Great, thanks, Sandra. I realise there's quite a few hands and time's ticking on, so I'm going to take a couple of questions at a time now, if that's okay, questions and comments. Certainly just to also reassure members that every time a vaccine is delivered, part of the consultation there is to reiterate that advice that Sandra just gave, that you must continue with the hands, face, space, ventilation, precautions, etc. So I shall now go. John, I think your hand's still up, and Jake, I think there's rolled. So go to Councillor Chris Kennedy and Councillor Bramble.
Thank you. Yeah, it's taking a very long time to unmute today. I don't know why. Firstly, a huge thanks to Richard and Laura and the team. Quite extraordinary work going on under immense pressure. I'm really pleased with the way it's working out. The event that Richard mentioned for the Orthodox Jewish community on Saturday apparently is already booked out, and I think that's why he said it might go over past midnight because there's been such demand for it. Looks like we might be able to do that with other communities. Thanks, John and Jake, for flagging the event on Thursday for our Black African and Black Caribbean heritage residents and information for them. We're doing a similar thing across 3 boroughs in partnership with Haringey and Enfield for our Turkish heritage and Turkish speaking communities on the 23rd, which I think is the Tuesday. So huge amount of work going on. Our comms team putting amazing stuff out there. Sandra has done some fantastic videos in association with the local government association. So those are being watched not just in Hackney, not just in London, but around the country. Very short, brilliant little pieces about the vaccine and different aspects of it. And I'd urge people to share those wide and large. Thanks ever so much, everybody. Cheers.
Great, thank you, Chris. Councillor Bramble.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to add Councillor Kennedy into those thanks as well, with his leadership working alongside the team and the comms team and those in education on this. So thank you, Councillor Kennedy. Just 2 quick things, Chair. One was when people refuse the vaccination, how quickly are they offered it? I think that will be handy to know. And just to build on Jake's point, this is built on years of mistrust. So we are working against that at local level to reassure people at a local level, using local people like Dr. Husbands and people from the community to reassure people around why it's safe to take the vaccine. You've got to remember that Black people and people from other ethnic minorities are disproportionately affected by so many negative statistics in society. You cannot be surprised that they might think that if they take the vaccine, that they would be disproportionately affected by this vaccine. And I think there's 2 things. It's locally how we reassure people and how that plays out. And actually, I think it's also good to remember, while we're talking about our community that is predominantly Black, across the country, if you look at nationally, it isn't just what Black communities, white communities have those insecurities, and that is playing out elsewhere as well. So it's, again, we're talking about our community, so we need to be prevalent about that, but it's just saying it is playing out in other communities too. And I think at a local level, everyone has to try their best to combat that, because I don't think many people trust national government on this. So just thank you to everyone who's working locally to play against that. So those are my comments, Chair, but just keen to know, when people refuse it, how then quickly are they offered it again? Because that might give some reassurance to people if they feel a bit anxious the first time the letter comes, that they'll know it will come again. Thank you.
Richard, do you want to pick up what the general approach has been? I mean, it's very much, anyway, over to you.
The message going out now is if you're aged 70 and above and you've not had your vaccine, then contact your GP practice. So the ball's been placed in the patient's court, but also practice will continue to contact patients, as appointments become available. There's no hard and fast rule about when that will happen.
Yeah, and practices aren't sending letters, for example, so we're not relying on the post and the eccentricities of that. It's all either text, then followed up with phone calls. And then other work if you can't get through in those ways. I've got Andrew. John, your hand is still up as well, so I'll take both those 2 last comments and then we'll better move on.
Thank you, Mark. Just to add, I really welcome those figures for the city. I think those are very impressive figures that have been achieved in relation to the vaccine uptake, and that's been a lot of hard work by partners and colleagues. So Richard, thank you to you and all your staff and everyone who's done that, and to our communities. I know it's in the paper around rough sleepers, and it does say that will come in a couple of weeks, but I think that data is crucial for us in terms of that vulnerable group. So if we could get that data as soon as possible, and just in relation to, I suppose, Jake's point, and then again, Councillor Bramble's, I would love to believe that, as more people hear about this, then the uptake will become quicker. I do think we need to be cautious and ensure that this doesn't then just deepen, if people don't uptake, the already, if you like, structural inequalities in health that we know about and add to them. So I do think we have to have a short-term plan, but we also need a long-term plan to support people, understand the reasons why people are hesitant, and listen to what the communities are telling us.
Yeah, no, thank you, Andrew, absolutely. That's the last of the hands, so I think we probably ought to move on. I welcome also lots of really interesting comments.
Chair, if I may, I think that's so important where people are saying we have to listen to the community, because my concern is that if there isn't a high uptake within the Black and other ethnic community, it's another way they're stigmatised. It's another way potentially they could be blamed. It's their fault they're not taking it. It's their fault the virus is spreading. So I think that kind of, we're listening, we want to relay your issues and your fears, and we're taking that kind of positive, pragmatic road. I think that will help too. So I just wanted to reiterate that and thank everyone for their thoughtfulness in this approach. Thank you so much, Chair.
Yeah, no, I quite agree. No, thank you for emphasising that. All right, I guess we better move on now to the data intelligence. I appreciate that we often don't have much time at the end for the local outbreak control plan, but actually quite a lot of what's in there we've already started to discuss. One or two questions I had about the plan have already come up. So I'll go to the data intelligence piece. I know Deanna normally presents it, and then we'll have 5 minutes or so. I'll probably try and take this up to about 1:45. So Sandra or Deanna, do you want to share a screen?
Yes, I'll do that. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Mark. I'm off now.
Yeah, Richard, sorry. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. Brilliant. Thank you.
I hope you're able to see the screen now.
You're very quiet, Deanna.
Sorry, I'll do this.
You can see the screen. You just need to hear you.
Is that better?
Not really.
Hello? Is that better now?
Very quiet there.
I'm not sure why.
You're going to have to shout, I think.
I will be shouting.
Okay, that works. That works.
Good news anyway, so worth shouting about. So we have seen really significant decreases in incidence rates. So that this is the case rate, and you can see in the chart, or the map rather, on the top left here in the screen. Actually, today's report showing even further decreases. So all these areas that are in the east of London and some of the western boroughs and those in the south, they're no longer over 250 per 100,000 cases incidence rate. So that's, again, really good news. The incidence rates have reduced massively. Just a month ago, I was presenting the same slide to you where we saw quite a few boroughs with rates over 1,000 per 100,000 population. And now there are only a few boroughs, like I said, actually just 4 with incidence rate over 250 per 100,000. So great news about that. Positivity rates continue to decline as well. So that's the proportion of tests that come back positive. So while you can see that, so this is the bottom left map. While you can see that still most of the London boroughs are in red, in fact, the rates have gone down significantly, and most of the boroughs kind of hover within 10% of positivity rates, and a few of them have already seen a reduction of under 7.5% for positivity, and case rate change. So that means how that changed from previous week. You can see the entire map is in green. That means that there has been a decline in case rates of between 1 to 50% reduction. So again, really good news for entire London, and of course us, Hackney specifically, and that's presented in this chart. So this is for Hackney and the City of London. We have updated the data, so I do encourage you to go on the Hackney Council website to see how the most recent chart looks like. And I can tell you that in the most recent week, there has been a further reduction. So the very last week here, up till 2nd of February, the new data shows further reduction. So our rate is now around 135, if I'm not mistaken. But again, just really good news. The rates are now quite similar to the ones that we've seen in autumn. We have gone down from a huge spike back in December and January, where the rates were over 900,000. So the lockdown has really been working. Everybody would be relieved to know. And in terms of how the rates look like among different age groups, we have seen reduction across all of the age groups. We do still see higher rates among the younger adults and those between 45 and 64. But when I say higher rates, they're still under 250 per 100 population, and they have been going down for the past month. So the trajectory is looking good. In terms of our impact on the NHS services, we have seen a decrease in the number of COVID beds occupied by COVID patients, both in the general and acute and in critical care. So the percentages have gone down from 52 and I would say around 50% last month to around 20% this month. So again, a big reduction in COVID patients. And the staff absences that are COVID related have also reduced significantly. You can see it from the bottommost chart here, quite a huge decline there, which is again good because that means that there are more staff on site and able to service the patients when they do get admitted. We have not yet seen a reduction in the number of weekly deaths. So we've for the past month, we've quite consistently seen the number of weekly deaths of around 30 in 1 week, and I mean COVID deaths. You can see that we are above our 5-year average, and that's mainly because of those deaths that are due to COVID. But again, given all the positive reductions in the number of cases and the number of patients with COVID in hospitals, hopefully we will see these numbers going down soon. And this is my very quick update this week. Haven't got anything else, but I will take questions if there are any.
Great, thanks, Tina. Just see if there are any questions and comments. The hand up. So yes, Sandra.
I just have a comment really, which is to, in a rather self-congratulatory way, say that as a system, we've managed extremely well, particularly health and social care colleagues, given the state of the pandemic and the extreme cold weather that we've been having recently. We might have expected to have a much worse time, and so to see all of these numbers coming down, particularly the hospital admissions and the pressure on services, is a really good thing.
Great, thank you. Well, whilst people consider their thoughts, I'd also say, but of course, one area which is still under a great deal of pressure is the critical care in the Homerton Hospital, which will probably be the last place where the reductions are seen. Well, it will be. So they're still in their super surge kind of situation in terms of ITU beds, and some of that is because with treatment improvement, people are on ITU for longer, but nonetheless they're still under huge pressure. And of course, it's not just ITU staff; it's a lot of other staff who have been redeployed to support the ITU work and all the extra beds, etc., etc. So it has a knock-on effect throughout the hospital, even though some of the admission rates, as you said, are coming down, which is good. So hopefully we'll see that there is a gradual, slow decrease in the critical care admission rate, but it's coming down more slowly than other things. Other metrics are coming down. So whilst I said that, Helen Fentiman, do you want to come in comment?
Yes, thank you. I mean, the data looks great, and again, there've been lots of thanks to everybody's effort, and I repeat that it is really quite remarkable how the impact can turn things, the input, sorry, can turn things around. My question may be more directed towards Sandra, which is, now the numbers are coming down, they're getting lower positively. Does that mean that we can do a bit better at test and trace? So is it easier with a lower number of cases to be more effective in test and tracing?
Sandra.
Yeah, so yes, with smaller numbers of cases, yes, it's easier. Although, and we're at the level, as Diana was saying, that we were at in autumn when we were coping quite well. We also have increased the capacity of our local contact tracing team, and have an arrangement with Public Health England in case there's a further surge and we need to manage that capacity a bit more effectively again. So we had a bit of a problem over New Year when we had a sudden hike in cases that just overwhelmed the team for a day or two. But we now have not only increased our capacity, but have a contingency arrangement about having a kind of concentrated focus on specific areas that we tell them about should that happen again. So the short answer is yes, but the longer answer is that we've made arrangements so that we should be operating optimally all of the time now anyway.
Thanks, Sandra. Marianne.
Thank you, Chairman. The question I'm asked constantly is, obviously, it's really good to see that the figures are going down, but that's what everyone would expect, given that we've been in lockdown since just before Christmas. But the public are concerned about the effect of the children going back to school in just over 3 weeks' time. What thought are we giving to ensuring there's not a bounce back in these figures once the children return? And is there any capacity to provide the vaccination for the teachers before they go back to school? The concern is that the children will be going back and they'll be going out into the community, into the shops, and we're just going to get escalation again, back into a full lockdown. And I think people are very concerned about this constant yo-yo, up, down, up, down. So what are we doing in a strategy way to ensure that we can manage when the children go back to school and ensure that the teachers are as supported and as we possibly can? Thank you, Chairman.
So in terms of vaccinating teachers, we don't have the local discretion to be able to vaccinate teachers who are not among the JCVI priority cohorts 1 to 9, which are the groups of people that we need to be concentrating on. Although in the second phase of the vaccination programs, that's after the cohorts 1 to 9 have been completed, the government will be looking at prioritising other parts of the population and looking at other key workers outside of health and social care. So all I can say on that is specifically is watch this space. But in terms of supporting the schools, excuse me, we've been preparing for this since before Christmas because, well, we were preparing for the sort of Christmas break when we were expecting to have that 5-day break and before we went into the second national lockdown. And so we have been supporting schools to either provide in-school testing or to access have easy access to these rapid tests, the lateral flow testing. So working alongside the schools where they have the capacity, either the space, the willingness, etc., to be able to provide the tests on site, or to make sure that they just know about and are able to publicise to their staff how to get tests done either close to the school or nearer home, so that teachers can be tested on a regular basis. And there's there are plans to test the older children, that's secondary school children, before they go back to school, whenever that will be. It's not clear yet. We're still waiting for an updated guidance from the Department for Education on whether there's going to be regular testing of the students as well as the staff. But whatever the guidance is, we're going to continue to support schools with that.
Thank you, Sandra. The next comment, Sandra, can I just, there's a question, a follow-up question from Helen about test and trace in the chat. If you want to just have a quick look whilst I let Haren ask or make his comment.
So thank you, Mark. So it's the graphic from the quite nicely presented, and we can see overall improvement in the picture. But one thing we are still aware that the death rates in care homes is getting much better. But do we have some kind of graphic form to tell us the overall picture and where it's driving us to?
Thanks. I'm not sure I understood the question entirely. So do we have a graphic form to show us the overall picture of what?
In the care homes, what's happening?
Oh, right. Just in care homes alone. We haven't at the moment. That is something we could provide.
Yeah.
As long as the numbers are, as long as we don't have to suppress the numbers because they're too low, that is something we could provide on a monthly basis. Deanna can respond to that.
Deanna, yeah, thanks, Jenny. Got your hand up.
Just to reassure you, we've got a care homes working group and they do review those data on a weekly basis. So there is a ongoing review of the situation in care homes and they act if they see anything that is out of ordinary. For instance, recently we saw that some of the staff see higher incidence rate, that they're more likely to test positive if they are agency. So they've acted to ensure that agency staff do not go to different care homes, but they work in one setting and don't travel. Because we thought that might be potentially a route for transmission, for example. But yes, we do review it on a weekly basis.
Thank you.
And so to respond to Helen's follow-up question, I'll just read it out because I realise that not everyone can see the chat. It says, is it possible to say how effective test and trace is in identifying positive cases and the contribution made to the overall reduction of cases? So test and trace will identify all the people who have a positive test, whether that's one of these rapid lateral flow tests or the more sort of traditional, if you like, PCR test. So those are the ones, you know, the PCR test for people who've got symptoms, or the lateral flow test that we're targeting at people who don't have symptoms. All of those test results go into the test and trace system. So it picks up all of the positive cases, whether they've had symptoms or not. The contribution it makes to the overall reduction in cases very much depends on whether or not people, in response to their positive result, do two things. One is self-isolate and the other is identify their contacts so that they can be advised to self-isolate either by the national test and trace team or by our local test and trace team. So we know that that's an area that we still need to do some work on. We know that a significant proportion of people don't self-isolate or don't even get tested because they're concerned about the impact on them, on their families, on their income, on people that they care for. So we're doing some work on that at the moment. And we also know that people, for the same reasons, don't necessarily identify all of their contacts because they're concerned about the potential impact on their contacts if they were then required to self-isolate very suddenly and potential loss of income, etc. So there's still some work to be done on that, both locally and nationally, but it is having an impact.
Great, thank you, Sandra. We'll turn to the local outbreak board. Sorry, the control plan in a second. Just to say that I hadn't realised and I couldn't understand why I was sometimes blocked from the chat in certain Teams meetings until it was explained to me that you need to open Teams first before you press on your calendar link. So and I often just press straight on the calendar link. So so when we have our gap, people log off, open Teams, log back on. It should all work again. It has worked for me since I did that. So maybe it's just me, but in case it's one or two others, it's happened to pass that hint on. So Sandra, having drawn breath, do you want to just point out some of the highlights from the control plan, and we'll take a few questions for the next 5 minutes or so.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And so, and you're right, we have covered a number of these things already. We talked a bit about vaccine hesitancy, and in the context of that, a bit about the communications work that we've been doing. So I won't go over those again, the key things I want to draw your attention to, aside from those, which are some of the major areas of work that we've done over the past month, are that we have a new draft testing strategy, and that's because we felt we needed a strategic approach. There was all these sort of requests or demands to initiate new testing programs, but without a sort of strategic context. And so we're trying to draw it all together in a way that is helpful for us locally. You should all have access to that through the document. And Maggie, who's our test lead, would really welcome comments back on that. And I actually already spoke about the work in schools in response to Marianne's question, actually. So I think those are probably were the key things. And then last but not least, and Jake's mentioned this in the chat as well, is that we've had an expansion of our Champions programme. We've now got, actually at the time of writing, there might be more now, 127 community champions, all trained up and deployed and working across a range of, I think they represent practically all of the various community groups, you know, of various national and ethnic origins that we have in Hackney and the city, and they work either independently or through various community organisations. And alongside that, we have already awarded in the first round grants to 27 voluntary and community organisations to develop and provide COVID community communications, and we've got round 2 coming up imminently. And last but not least on that, we were successful in securing additional funding from MHCLG to support the community champions work.
Great, thank you, Sandra. Hands popped up. Who's that? Andrew.
Thank you, and thank you, Sandra. Sandra, just very quickly, and I know you're aware that the requirements in terms of looking at surge testing and how we're going to build that into our plans going forwards, please.
Well, we're scoping that at the moment, and we're looking at taking a 2-pronged approach. One is what would we need to do as a local system, probably as City and Hackney rather than as individual authorities, because that just would be the best use of resources. And so basically, if we were going alone as City and Hackney, what would we need to do, and how would we quickly stand up and deploy a number of people locally, whether they were volunteers or maybe local authority employees, to distribute tests if we were going to go down the having to distribute home test route as they've done in other places. The other thing that we're exploring through Havering, who is managing the contract on our behalf, is an inquiry with Hub Logistics, who's running the lateral flow testing sites, to see whether they would be able to take that on for us if that was required as a sort of a North East London wide approach. So we're waiting to hear back about that, whether that's the right, whether they're the right organisation to be able to do that, whether it's a slightly different operation from what they're currently running, and so whether they've got the capability or even they've got the capacity to do it, we don't know. So we're going to wait to hear back, and at the same time exploring if we had to go alone, what would we do. On top of that, there's a sort of a London-wide approach being drawn together by PHE to say, does it make sense if there are more of these cases of the South Africa variant identified in a number of boroughs? Does it make sense to keep popping up individual areas doing 10,000 tests rather than taking a London-wide approach and saying, well, this is probably more of a London-wide issue, and how do we deal with it on a city-wide basis or across various boroughs with support of PHE? And that conversation has been led by Kevin Fenton.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll give the last comment to Mayor Philip.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Sandra. Just on the community champions and the funding for voluntary sector organisations, just checking, we're sort of mapping and gapping, I guess, any communities that we feel haven't quite connected with that programme, because I know that the work that HCVS and you have done has been brilliant in terms of building that relationship and that confidence from test and trace all the way through now to the vaccines work. But I always still manage to stumble upon somebody that's quite a sort of significant stakeholder that doesn't seem to have sort of bid in, and maybe there was a sort of hesitancy to be formally involved at that first round of funding, and just making sure that we go back out and connect. Some of the migrants organisations just seem not to be sort of geared up for this type of work. So it's just an opportunity to engage.
Yeah, thanks. That is a good question, and Jake might be able to answer more fully. But in the first round, there were a number of organisations who just didn't feel ready and didn't put bids in, and that we are specifically targeting with this second round of grants. But in terms of the champions, we are constantly going back out and trying to identify those gaps and trying to recruit people from various communities to make sure that they're represented.
Jake, I'll leave you the last comment up. We need to make it brief because our time's up.
Very quick. I mean, yes, Phil, we are reviewing who hasn't applied and doing some direct phoning. If there are organisations that you think we should nudge, then, or people in the community, please let me know. In terms of the target communities for this next round, it is those representing Caribbean or African diaspora, people with sensory or physical disabilities, and also people with learning disabilities. So they're our target audience, and the Bangladeshi community as well. So
all right, thank you.
Has particular community they want us to reach out to, just drop me an email and we'll make sure that happens.
Thanks, Jake. That's helpful. So I think we should wrap up the Outbreak board now. It'll give ourselves, I think, about 6 minutes to have a break. We go on until 12 after that. So I'll leave you to sort of switch cameras off and things and take a pause, make a cup of tea, and then I'll see you shortly. Thanks very much, everyone.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
Not too bad, Jonathan. And yourself?
Your hair is looking. I think it's a really good length for you.
Is it?
Yeah. It's kind of
I
dashing.
was tempted with my sort of a rather puerile sense of humour when noting other apologies. Obviously, it says other apologies for maybe bad hair. It crossed my mind this morning that I maybe should. But I'm not sure. But I'm not a homegrown sort of mad clipperer, as you can tell. I'm not sure. I do this bit. Yeah, that's about as far as it goes, and then I don't trust myself. David, you're not averse to running the clippers over the back of the head, are you?
No, I decided to this lockdown to just get them out, and yeah, my partner did the front, back, and sides. I did the fringe. It was a team effort.
Oh, well done. That's good.
10-minute job, as somebody pointed out to me, it does look like a 10-minute job.
Awful. Actually, Jonathan, you were working the hot convict look last lockdown, weren't you?
I did that for charity. So, but yeah, I quite liked it, and I would do it again, but I'm not allowed to.
You did look very Travis Bickle.
But that's what, yeah, that was the I wanted that sort of intensity.
I'm wondering what's happening to people's toenails with this. Everyone talks about the hair, but what's happening with the toenails?
Ooh. Maybe we should just leave that hanging.
That's what it goes.
Because it is 1 minute to 11, and I need to call us to order. Okay, well, there's somebody showing off in the chat.
Woohoo!
Yeah, no, I think hopefully most of us can still reach. We're still none of us of an age, anyway, whatever. Good to know, Sandra. Let's call this meeting to order. So it is now just turned 10. So welcome everyone. ICB public session. I think most people have just been on the Outbreak board are still with us. Welcome to anyone who's just joined. Just going through the usual. Any apologies, Alex, that I need to know of?
No additional ones, no.
I noticed that Denise D'Souza, you have to leave early, so I'll note that from 11 o'clock. We don't have any questions in advance from the public. Usual thing about I'll take questions from the public if I can, time permitting, but I can't guarantee that, depending on how the time's going. We have the minutes from the previous meeting. Yep, so I'm just finding declarations of interest. I realise I've just skipped over them. We've got the register there. Anyone else want to declare anything with relation to? Thank you, Jake. I was expecting that. Jake, would you like to share your conflict today's agenda?
Yes, I've got a conflict with item 5, Chair.
Yeah, sure. I appreciate that. Thank you. Anyone else to add to with relation to the agenda? Nope. So going back to the minutes, I don't propose to go page by page. Does anyone have any comments about the minutes? Any corrections or Haren, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, just a very minor. My name is spelled as Haren.
Okay, we should get that sorted out. Thank you, Haren. Sorry about that. John.
So sorry. Yeah, sorry, I was a bit late. And yeah, just on declaration of interest for item 5 as well. I'm a health watcher and advisor to the voluntary sector group as well.
Of course. Yeah, thank you. So if minutes are fine, can I ask City ICB to approve them? And Hackney ICB to approve them? Can I have some thumbs and nods, please?
Approved.
Thank you. So the action tracker, we've only got a couple of actions. Both are closed. I think they're pretty straightforward in terms of what they were and what's been done. No, can't see any comments about that. So can I ask City ICB to approve the action tracker, and Hackney ICB to approve the action tracker?
Approved.
Thank you. Super. Right. Okay, let's get to the first substantial item. I've got Jonathan's name against it. Obviously, Jake is at the heart of writing it. The VCS enabler business case, which we've got a fair chunk of time to look at. So we can have a sort of at least a good 5-minute presentation before we turn to questions, 5-10 minutes. Who's talking to this? Is it you, Jonathan, or is it you, Jake?
So it's really Jake and colleagues' presentation, but I thought it might be helpful just to say a little bit in context.
Yep. Okay.
So we'll all recall that ICB agreed the VCS operating model in July last year, and we've agreed that the VCS are going to continue to be a key partner in our future health and care system post-April, with HCVS through Jake being full members of ICPB and the VCS sitting on the Neighbourhood Health and Care Board, building on the excellent contribution Vanessa has been making to SOC over the last year. So I think the VCS enabler needs to be seen in that context. So we need to be thinking about what do we need to do as a system if we're going to support the VCS to play a full part in the future of health and care in City and Hackney. And by that, I mean, how can we best draw on insight from communities when we're looking at the health and care challenges we face? And how do we have a system that best allows us to marshal their resources when we're putting together solutions? So I think what I'm saying is it's really important we see the VCS enabler as a system resource rather than a VCS initiative, and judge it in terms of how it will help us as a whole system to better serve people's needs in City and Hackney. So I thought it was important just to set it in that context. And with that, I'll hand over to Jake.
Right. Jake, can I just, before we do, just put just a little bit more context, just because in terms of the boards, what's the ask of the board today? There's 5 different things. So obviously we're going to note the report, but we do need to consider the evaluation needs, and you'll focus on that in your presentation, and also the idea around the prospect of submitting new business cases for further investments. We need to consider that part of it. Approving, in fact, I think rather than approving, I think it's endorsing the funding, because I think technically it is from the prevention investment monies from the CCG. So I think the CCG will eventually formally approve them, but I think clearly will take a steer from the endorsement here today. And then the last thing is to approve the system project sponsor. So we do need you to make sure that you pull out those bits in your presentation for us to really, so we can focus on that, those bits of work we need to attend to.
Thank you. And that's our last slide.
Actually, Jake, you're very quiet.
On our last slide of the presentation will be those questions. Can you hear me?
Very good. Okay. Yeah, that's better. Yeah, good.
I'm just going to share the screen. I'm here with Vanessa Morris, who's the chair of the Voluntary Sector Transformation Leadership Group, and Liz Hughes, who's our COVID lead, our health lead. Let me just share my screen. Hopefully this will all work seamlessly. Can you see that now?
It's coming. Yep.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So over to Vanessa, actually, who's going to kick us off.
Thanks, Jake, and hello to everyone. Thanks for inviting me here. Yes, I'm the chair of the Voluntary Sector Leadership and Transformation Group and Chief Exec of Mind in the City, Hackney and Waltham Forest. And since the VCS enabler workstream was approved in July, I think it's fair to say that the community situation has significantly deteriorated. We have a wicked problem. The wicked problem is inequality, which has been exacerbated significantly by COVID. We have clusters of significantly entrenched challenges, desperate clusters of grief and despair, multi-generational families under acute pressure. You know, we've had these discussions repeatedly around how the distribution of the problems of COVID are completely unequal. And we have been leading work around the voluntary sector resilience to support and understand how communities can feel like they've got a seat at the table and solve their own problems. And this is a real challenge at the moment as people are very isolated from each other. And I think some of those long ingrained issues around crafts and inequality are very, very much at the fore, and they're making it harder for people to connect to services at the moment. So that's the background for us of why this has become a much more urgent issue and how we wanted to tailor and target our response to it, which we've done in consultation with the voluntary sector, small groups and large groups. It's about us being able to speak the same language and be able to share solutions together. Now, we know in order to be able to do this, we need to make sure that we've got a targeted but also intentional and generative approach to problem solving. So it needs to be around community finding solutions for themselves, us having a targeted approach to investment, but also to make sure that we are centering the voices of people who traditionally haven't had strong advocacy or strong capacity in terms of community networks, particularly the African and Caribbean communities. So Jake is going to talk us through what this means for us in practice and how we have built this programme.
Thanks, Vanessa. Really good scene setting there. Before I go into the detail of what this toolbox, this model is offering the system, I think just a few points. As Vanessa said, we came to you with our draft operating model back in July, which work started actually back in April. Since then, we've been meeting with a range of voluntary sector networks, various system leaders, and we were able to share an outline of what this toolbox was all about with you all back in November, you'll remember. Concurrently, we were talking to public health and the council about test and trace, and I think that whole approach, working with Dr. Sandra Husbands, the public health team, has been a real example of how toolbox could work, in that, you know, we were gathering lots of insight from the neighbourhoods, from different communities, feeding that into public health. Public health then were issued a sizable grant from government, 3 million, to help with test and trace rollout. We then took a business case to say, look, we can help you by maximising the assets within the voluntary and community sector in City and Hackney. And in doing so, we then created a bespoke grants programme, which, as Sandra explained in the earlier meeting, has really invested both in champions and local organisations. So that, for me, is an example of how this could work. We then had formal discussions with David Mayer, Jonathan McShane, Lee Walker in the CCG about, well, what's the fund envelope? Because, you know, we originally set out an approach for PINs, that feels like over 18 months ago, where £2 million was identified to help incentivise transformation, and approximately half of that was earmarked for the voluntary sector. Obviously, with COVID and budget pressures, that money was not quite available, but David made it clear that there was around 300,000 as a funding envelope to help activate the VCS enabler. So how does this thing work? What is it? Well, for those that don't know the City and Hackney voluntary sector, it's huge. We are lucky in many ways in both City and Hackney that we have such a vibrant sector that we can rely on to plug the gaps that the state perhaps can't. And we've got a long history of bringing organisations together through various networks. And ultimately, we have about 800 organisations who are active across all our networks that we can engage at any one time. So this toolbox is all about maximising those assets. Our plan is to create large quarterly assemblies that would meet and discuss a big issue. And, you know, it could be vaccine hesitancy, it could be mental health, it could be poverty, it could be pressures within the home. And we would use that big issue to then focus the minds of the voluntary sector around what can we actually do to solve that. And the idea is that we would invite colleagues from the system leaders from across the health and care sector to join us in those assembly meetings. And then we would have a sort of an information, here's where we currently think the issues are, and then break into working groups depending on which networks people are part of. So it could be as many as 8 different breakout groups in the sort of Zoom setting, who would go away, join the meeting and work out what their sector can contribute, bring everyone back together and agree some key priorities and focus for work. The plan is then the VCS executive, who are elected reps from across the voluntary sector representing those networks, would then drill down into what precisely can we offer the system as a voluntary sector. The plan would then be to work that up, with a system sponsor. So in the case of Test and Trace, Sandra was our system sponsor in many ways. So we would identify a system sponsor who is relevant to that area of investigation and work with them to develop a business case, which we would then bring back to the ICPB or Neighbourhood Health and Care Board. Sitting alongside this would be ensuring that we can support particularly some of the really small organisations who struggle to engage with the system for a variety of reasons. We need to build their capacity, and I would particularly urge us to focus on African and Caribbean communities, as Vanessa said, who are quite poorly represented from an organisational perspective. We would want to, this whole process is based on co-production, so not just with organisations, but with residents as well. We're going to talk a little bit more about how we'll be engaging residents. So we're providing you as a system the mechanism by which you can invest directly in organisations. I think the key thing to note is that this isn't just about issuing money, this is about respect, this is about empowerment, and also any organisations who the system invests in will be brought together on a monthly basis so that we can be continually gathering evidence of what's working, where the challenges are, where the gaps are. So as I've said, those large assembly meetings, and those of you will know that we do have very large Zoom meetings that engage across all our communities. This is an opportunity for you to work with us to set the priorities for voluntary sector activity. As I've said earlier, we will want to come back to you with specific business cases about those priorities, and we're calling that a community investment fund. And there could be different ways that we could help issue money or deploy money into local organisations. I think it's really important to note that we would want those organisations to then, as part of their contract, if you like, with the system, to then engage with PCNs, NDTs at a neighbourhood level, and it will help our community navigation offer. It will also provide insight that we will feed into the new population health hub, and we are members of the inequality steering group and helping to really set the tone for where key actions need to happen. So this diagram just shows how we bolt on into the system. So you've got in the top right there the current system governance diagram, and on the left are all the arrays of different networks that we shepherd and support and host. So should this be approved, we want to get going as soon as possible. So getting the staff in place and starting to create the timetable for the quarterly assemblies and agreeing an evaluation approach. And I know evaluation is the next thing on our agenda. So as you can see here, we've been working with Anna Garner on how we would prioritise which areas of health and care we would want to drill down into. And you as system leaders can help and support us with that. So the idea would be to have our first assembly around about July time, well, June in fact, and then follow that up with detailed drilling down into exactly what we can do and offer the system. And if in effect you've got a circular process, so once you've had one assembly, you then go in and start drilling down, working out what the action plan is, bringing that back to then the ICPB for investment, and then the next circular process begins. So ideally we would have another assembly around October time. In terms of the budget, so I mentioned there was a 300k envelope. What we're actually asking for is funds from April beyond, going forward, but also to reflect the costs of all the work and development work we've been doing since April of last year. I'm probably going to pause there now and hand over to my colleague Liz. So we've been doing lots of engagement with some of you as board members, but also with PPI colleagues, Anne Sanders, Catherine McAdam. The two health watches is important that although we're Hackney CVS, we have got relationships in the city as well. So all our assemblies will be open to city voluntary sector organisations, and we've been working with various networks who represent the city. So I'm going to hand over to Liz now, who's going to tell you a bit more about how we're engaging residents and communities. Liz, can I hand over to you?
Thank you. Can I just check that people can hear me?
Yep, it's fine.
Yeah, lovely. So how will residents and communities be involved? Well, the first way is very directly. We really want to encourage residents to take part in the assemblies, and we know there's quite a blurry line between an active resident and a community organisation. And we know that we'd have to work to involve some sections of the community that we hear less, and to make sure, as Jake says, that we have city voices involved. And there'd also be opportunities for residents to be reps, for example, on grant panels, and I'm sure there'll be other roles developed. And the resident perspective is built in right at the heart of the work through the two Health Watches, Health Watch City of London and Health Watch Hackney, who'd be involved through the leadership group, the VCS TLG, in the prioritisation, and then after the assembly in developing the programme. And the programme would also enable us to give better support to reps from community organisations to be able to engage with the system. So that, you know, the briefing and the support that an organisation needs in order to have to be able to participate well in a meeting, we'd be able to offer that better. And as Jake says, the insight from the programme would be there for the People and Places group and the Population Hub. Jake, could you move on the slides? And this is setting out what Jake's been through, but just pictorially, so it's simple to see. So a problem's identified, and that could be a problem coming from the system, an issue that needs, and the idea is for this to be dynamic and quite agile, and for us to be able to respond quickly. Or it could be something coming through the grassroots, through the neighbourhood conversations and the networks where there's something very urgent. And the prioritisation would happen, and then we take an issue to the assembly where there would be a large brainstorm across communities, residents, activists, community organisations with system leaders. And out of that, all of those ideas we'd bring to the VCS TLG with the system sponsor and start developing the ideas. What would a programme look like? A programme that's connected between the voluntary organisation, but also fits in with all the existing programmes. And then we'd bring that action plan either here or to the Neighbourhood Health and Care Board. The simplest way is to have a grant programme. There might be other ways of doing it, but the simplest way is one of those connected grant programmes along the lines of the one that we've done, the COVID information grants with public health. Could you move on? Thank you. So this is working through an example. So vaccine hesitancy. We obviously haven't had the benefit of holding an assembly, so this is guessing the type of things. So it's not about the details, it's about the process and the type of solutions and the type of thinking. So vaccine hesitancy, if we brought that to an assembly, people will talk about mistrust, the deep mistrust, the historic mistrust, where it's come from, how it's reflected in other parts of the system and using other services, but also about what's needed to be done to repair it. And so in our recommendations, we're thinking there will probably be things that we could do straight away. So people who perhaps waiting to see whether the vaccine's safe. So having micro grant schemes in neighbourhoods. Again, back to saying it's all about relationship. So trying to do myth busting through WhatsApp groups, building on the work of the COVID grants, and also thinking that people have been very isolated. They're at home looking at social media a lot. So peer support, social and walking groups as we come out of lockdown. And possibly hosting more calls with system leaders and comms from the council and CCG. But also looking at the long term, how can we co-produce something for the longer term? Because this mistrust that's being uncovered is going to be something for the long term. So we think solutions will quite often have a short-term aspect and a long-term aspect.
Thanks, Liz. So we've got some questions for you. I'm sure colleagues will also have questions about the detail of the business case, but I'm wondering if we Chair can just focus on these questions and then take sort of more specific questions about the business case if people have them. So I stop sharing screen or?
No, well, do you want to keep those up for a moment longer? So you've got obviously the system sponsor, which is clearly what I was interested to explore with you.
Do you want us to respond to that? Sorry.
I think they are questions that I would certainly think would come up. So yes, do you want to respond over the next couple of minutes whilst people start to put their hands up and things? Yes, I think there'll be 4 very useful ones to respond to.
So the system sponsor is almost our ambassador who can, on behalf of the ICPB, the wider system, work with us on what those drilling down into that priority. So obviously, if it was around test and trace, Sandra would be the perfect person. If it was around mental health, it could be Richard Fradgley or Dan Birmingham, the mental health commissioning lead, and so on. And that sponsor would work with us to actually understand the current status quo, help us access the right data. On behalf of the system, suggest what the system thinks the role of the voluntary sector could be. And then we would bring the grassroots perspective to that, and then ideally agree on a key areas of focus. And as Liz has explained, that then kickstarts the business case process so that we can work out exactly what the voluntary sector can deliver on. But it would help us to understand how you would like us to select those people, or whether you would like us to suggest people and then just approach them and create that relationship that way.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Jake. Maybe take the slides down now. Let's see where we are with questions. Hands are going up. I mean, it's a clear question for us. It may well be the detail has to be managed outside the meeting, but nonetheless. Does anyone have any thoughts initially about Jake's point about how a system sponsorship could be established? I expect the hands are up for other questions, so just speak if you have something particular to say about that. Otherwise, we should return to it. Okay, so I'm going to go to the questions. Anna's written something in the chat, which is very helpful about evaluation and noting what doesn't work as well as what does. So I've got Haran, you're up first.
Yes, I think on your Jake's presentation, this did come up about vaccine hesitancy and decline. But I wasn't too clear. How do you identify the real issues behind it? What is the cause of it? And how would you solve that? Because that I didn't understand from your presentation. And I think that's a key priority for primary care and everyone, public health and so on. So can you please?
I think the direct response to that, Haran, is that, through talking, the reason people are mistrusting is that they don't feel they've had accurate messaging or flip-flop messaging from government. And if you're somebody who feels that you're affected by structural racism or other barriers, then it compounds that fear and mistrust. So I think we would want to use our vast networks that we have access to stimulate that dialogue. And it's from the dialogue that you work out what's the reasons for hesitancy. So, for instance, I've been talking a lot to leaders in the Black community over the last week, and some of them are perhaps coming from the conspiratorial perspective, although it's not as many as you'd expect. Most are actually waiting to see how the vaccine rolls out and whether there are deaths as a result of people taking the vaccine. And I think that's really giving people huge concerns. Particularly, I was speaking to one gentleman whose son is sickle cell. So he knows he needs to take the vaccine, but he wants to work out, which of the vaccines is going to be most effective. They want to make rational decisions, but often don't feel they've got the information. The other thing to point out as well, which is really important, is that those of us who listen to Radio 4, watch the BBC News and are connected in the mainstream, we're getting useful information. If you're not somebody who uses mainstream news, you're at the whim of algorithms. And therefore, what lands on your phone is what you trust. And unfortunately, as we all know, a lot of people are reading a whole load of hogwash coming through their phones. So they're not able necessarily to have the full spectrum of quality, trusted information.
Fine, thanks. Randall.
Thank you. I've got, I guess, several questions, and I don't want to sound entirely negative on this. I think the overall concept of doing something to better coordinate activities of the volunteer sector is a good idea. But I have concerns about this particular proposal where it is currently. For starters, it's built on non-recurrent funding, and it's clearly a function that we would, if we build it, we would wish to keep rather than have it go away. So I'd like to understand what the suggestion is to address that. Second, there's just no clear explanation of why the staffing level that appears to be built into the numbers here is the right staffing level. It sort of seems like it was fit to the number that was available in the non-recurrent funding rather than the other way around. And and then, Liz was saying, we might want to have grants program. Well, if it's all spent on staffing, I don't know where the funding for the grants program is going to come from. And then from the city perspective, quite a few of our, if you will, volunteer organizations are really entirely informal. They're quite small. We have there's an informal carers group. There's a Bengali women's group. They're not really structured as an organization. They're just people who've sort of gotten together to deal with common issues. And I'm not at all clear on how this is really going to work with them. But fundamentally, it just seems to me that this is a bit premature and needs a little bit more development before we say to the CCG, yeah, go ahead and spend that the last money in the bins on this. Anyway, those are my issues.
Thanks, Randall, and they're obviously very pertinent questions. I think on the basis of the conversations we had with David, and David may want to comment, but originally we had come with a much larger proposal that included a grant allocation of 1.2 million. But David quite rightly said, you haven't got that in the system at the minute. So we didn't present that alongside the actual model. I think in terms of the staffing, we're talking about a huge voluntary sector here, 800 organisations actively involved in networks. The amount of work that needs to go on behind the scenes is vast. And I think, because the CCG hasn't invested in the voluntary sector in perhaps the way it could have done over the last 5 years, this is a real reflection of the true value of the work that's required. I don't think the approach needs more development. We've been developing it since April last year. So this isn't something that's just been cobbled together in the last few months. This has had a long genesis, and I think our approach is tried and tested. And when we've talked with various people across the system and the voluntary sector, they very much like the model. Consensus across the board that this is an approach that can work. Obviously, we don't have the budget that the system has. Your system, the whole system resource is 530 odd million. And for us to request £1 million perhaps a year for investment in the voluntary sector, £1 million of 537 million, I think is very valid for the size of the voluntary sector. In fact, it's probably an undervalue in reality. I'm not sure, David, if you want to say anything about the system resources, because obviously we came.
I also see that Sunil's got his hand up as well. So I don't know whether it's Sunil, you wanted to speak to this particular point, or David. Sunil's hand's gone down. So David.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just on, I suppose just to catch the point while it's been made, but I know Jake didn't mean it in the way it perhaps might have been sounded. I mean, we've been a very strong investor in the voluntary sector in City and Hackney, in my opinion. We've developed a range of alliance mechanisms to include voluntary sector partners, which streamed money through to them, and we've obviously had other programs through the course of the year, including the community fund, which we didn't run it last year. So, but I know the point Jake is making. I think what you're describing, Jake, is how do we put, if we put digital and estates and primary care and workforce as enablers of system working and partners being able to come together to do innovative, creative stuff for their populations, the VCS as a combined entity having a similar enabler function is pretty critical, I think, particularly more critical in the context of COVID and how our communities have responded to the challenges of that. So on the resource side, we established a PINS framework in policy terms towards the latter end of the last financial year, which we were intending to drive into policy and contracts over the course of 2021. That obviously hasn't happened because of COVID. We did have a significant chunk of resource put aside to pump prime that due to COVID costs that had to be pared back to allow us to continue to deliver frontline services. The remaining element of that is the 300,000 that Jake has identified in the paper. Both Sunil and I and the CCG corporately feel comfortable with an additional investment in the voluntary sector to not only build their capacity for the settlement of needs that is going to be seen in our communities post this COVID surge, but also long term, the burden of the pandemic is going to fall possibly in homes with unemployment, with current projections anywhere between 7 and 9% by the end of June, and then the ongoing mental health burden of the pandemic, which we're seeing and which we're not able to adequately meet through just NHS services. It needs a much more dispersed community-based model of support to allow people to recover organically with the support of the voluntary sector. The final point is that I think if we get this right and we structure and frame it correctly, the voluntary sector will add a really important element of both admission avoidance and discharge facilitation in the system, which improves overall system effectiveness, because they will be able to take home people and settle them in their communities in a much more effective way. They will also be able to support people when they're in need and potentially avoid them needing to go into hospital, and hospitals will remain challenging places and environments for people to receive care for some time until COVID settles down more generally. So I guess I'm slightly rambling now, but commitment to this resource to kick-started. I think we need a system conversation once the budget settlement, the National Treasury settlement happens in March. We're expecting some guidance towards the end of March on the financial framework for services, certainly over the summer. And then there obviously be a budget review, a Treasury budget review in August, I believe, which will then reset the financial settlement more generally for the NHS going forward, hopefully into 2022. So by then, I think we can come back and have a much more balanced conversation about where we need to invest our resources. And we're not making any promises to anybody about what those prioritizations, that priority framework might look like. We need to build it together, look at the resource that is available to us as a partnership, and then make balanced decisions about how we invest. But good that we will have evidence from the voluntary sector from this initial tranche of resource, and we'll be able to gauge their contribution to ongoing work once we know our financial settlement later this year.
Yeah, thank you, David. So that essentially lays out the context for the sort of risk around not identifying recurrent funding at this stage, and not identifying recurrent investment pot for initiatives to bid against at this stage. So we have to accept that that is the case, as Randall has pointed out. Sonal, I don't know if you want to speak to anything on this particular point before I bring other people in. I'm aware this item will run over a bit, so we'll have to catch up on others later, but I think we need to keep exploring it. Sonal, did you want to say something about this point?
I'll be very quick, Mark. So I completely concur with the points David makes and sort of reinforce the point that at a point in time in the new financial year, we will have to revisit the investment around this piece of work or this program of work. And it is my view that partners will have to come together to decide how that investment progresses going forward. So it will be a system initiated discussion, and system conversations will have to take place around how that money is made available going forward. We will be an ICP as opposed to a CCG, and we'll be working to a devolved budget. And we are still working to emergency arrangements at this point in time, and will continue to do so, certainly into Q1 of next year and possibly Q2. And we're still waiting on guidance. So that's the first point. The second point is that the £2 million, we should now sort of draw a line under that, because that £2 million non-recurrent reserve that was made available by the CCG was repurposed for many reasons, including COVID, and that no longer exists. And the CCG has made the £300,000 available non-recurrently, despite being in a deficit position at its peak at £7.6 million. So we've managed to ring fence that because we think this is an important program of work. But at the same time, we recognise that system partners will have to work together in the coming financial year to talk about how this initiative, this program of work is funded.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Sonal, for that. So I'm going to take a couple of people at a time, really. So I've got Helen Fentiman and Chris Kennedy. Do you want to both make your comments, and then we'll see where we go with them? Helen.
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't want to repeat the comments that Randall has made, but I am concerned about the sustainability, and in a way that's added to by David's comments about no promises. And of course, it wouldn't be possible to make promises, but I do think that that needs to be kept in mind. The next point is that there is a national programme integrating the voluntary sector with STPs or ICS, whichever the terminology is at the moment. And the NHSE documentation for that talks about the benefits and value, impact and opportunities. And it's a question to Jake about whether you've given any consideration to those 8 areas that were included in that NHSE programme. And I know the reports have been delayed because of COVID, but whether you had any contacts with people who've been part of that and what learning there is from that. The next, which links to the next point, which is the evaluation. And I was looking at the outcomes you've described in the table, and they are described in the broadest terms. And I think that if these are the outcomes by which you'd use to try and make the case for ongoing funding, I'd suggest that they need to be tightened or perhaps made somewhat more specific, so that there's a very clear evidence trail of the impact and benefit. Then the final point I wanted to make is about managing expectations, because the principles of what you're trying to achieve here, I absolutely support. I think the intent is great, but I'm also very aware that it's easy to start to raise expectations. And through the assemblies, I think the of what can and can't be achieved is pretty critical. And I also wondered whether the assemblies, how they would fit with conversations in the neighbourhoods, because as I've understood the work in the neighbourhoods, it's about engaging local people in what's important to them, what their priorities are. And I wasn't quite sure how the assemblies described here would fit with neighbourhood conversations, and whether they would cross-cut, which would be not very helpful. Overall, I think it's great, but I think it needs a bit more working through and a bit more detail on some specific areas. Thanks.
Okay, and Chris Kennedy.
Thank you. Yes, I also have my concerns about this, so much so that actually I had what was actually a very helpful conversation with Jake yesterday evening. My main concern is that the Assembly won't do what you want it to do, which is to really find out what is needed, and actually becomes rather an unwieldy system that you fit on top of the voluntary sector organisations and the work they are trying to do to get done. The evaluation paper that we've got coming up that we're about to talk about talks quite a lot about using theory of change, and I'm worried that actually this proposal isn't looking at changing, but actually it's just doing something which is what feels like what we used to do in the past, and we're trying to move away from actually as a local authority in our grant making process in Hackney, which is get everyone together, find out where the gaps are, and have a grant programme. We're trying to move in Hackney towards something that builds in sustainability of organisations, helps them capacity build, perhaps funds them over longer periods of time, and isn't just giving out relatively small piecemeal bits of grant money here and there. When I went back to my policy team, they said they hadn't had as much time as they would have liked to talk this through, and actually Jake very kindly yesterday said he would be happy to meet with them and talk things through. So absolutely support the money going there. Let's not lose it, even though it's only 300,000 and we were hoping for a million. But could we have a little bit more thought about how to make the best use of it? Thank you.
Can we come back on
Jake, and I know Liz has got a hand up. You want to come make some comments about those?
Yeah. So to Helen's points about other examples, yes, we've been very much learning from other areas across the country. Sheffield, Manchester. Manchester helped us with our operating model and memorandum of understanding. I'm also part of a 4-borough London-based health transformation programme. So with colleagues in Bexley, Merton, who are very much on the social prescribing journey, and also Greenwich. So we do learn, and Bromley as well. So we are sharing and learning with each other. As to evaluation, it's always difficult because with any evaluation, I think when we get onto the next conversation about evaluation as a whole system, that's a very high level evaluation. We're interested in, does this model and approach work? I think when you get into the specifics of individual projects, well, any investment that goes in through grant programs, you have a very clear set of monitoring requirements. So organisations will say how many people they've met, what journey their beneficiaries have been on, and there's various evaluation tools, outcome stars and whatnot. Coming on to Chris's point about working with the policy team. Well, Chris, you know, you're obviously aware from our conversation last night that we were involving Sonia and Claire and others way back in November, and we have been keen, and I definitely will take up your offer of meeting with them to look at how this will work with the policy team's work, you know, once this is approved. In terms of capacity, well, it's a bit of a oxymoron, if you don't mind me saying, Chris, in that, you know, we're talking about a very small amount of money here. That's not going to make the voluntary sector sustainable when we're talking about, you know, over 2,000 organisations across City and Hackney. Yes, it would be great to be able to look at this over a 5-year period, to be able to develop organisations and to give them multi-year funding. But, you know, it's been very clear already from Sunil and David that that money is not clear yet in terms of our local system. But very much when we issue grants, we will be expecting some of those grant recipients to be identifying the core money they need to survive and grow as part of their offer. Usually it's like 10 to 20%. The council's in a different position. You've got a voluntary sector grant program that you know you've had for many years, so you're able to offer multi-year funding. We're not in that position, but we'd like to be, of course. What we have built into the budget and our approach is doing that intensive capacity building organisational development work with organisations who are resourced or are part of our network. I don't think this adds a layer of bureaucracy. In fact, I think what this does is actually gives us the connectivity to knit all the different parts of the voluntary sector together. So I don't see it as a bolt-on. It's actually at the heart of this. Liz, I know you had your hand up. I'm not sure if you want to come in.
I just want a couple of quick points. Firstly, about the neighbourhoods, that this absolutely fits with the neighbourhood conversations, and as those conversations become partnerships, the idea is that the chairs of the partnerships take part in the leadership group. So it's absolutely all connected, and they're part of feeding in issues that may not be able to be dealt with locally, like vaccine hesitancy, that we're going to need a much bigger response to. And secondly, to back up what Jake's saying, with the policy team, absolutely, that core grant programme that they have is fantastic, but I think it can work very well alongside this, but that's a further on conversation. And also just to know Honour's offer in the chat about helping with the evaluation, yes please, that would be fantastic.
Great, thank you. Now, I just to sort of, I propose that we continue to overrun on this item until 11 o'clock. So we've got 6 more hands up. So can I just take, again, comments in pairs or threes, depending on what the comments are. So Chris, you've got your hand up still. I guess it's Honour's turn now.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think it's fascinating, and I think I only referenced bolting on, Jake, in my comment there because you talked about bolting on, and it may be just a specific reference to a diagram where you were suggesting there was a bolt on. I think we have to move to this being absolutely integrated. This has to be how the ICPB goes about its business, and then that goes to the long-term future of the third community voluntary sector. I've responded quite separately to Gary Milo's provocation, and I'm quite content to have a debate with him outside this meeting, but I am fixated on the idea that when we're picking evaluation areas, mental health needs to be our first and largest concern, not least because we know about the predicament people are in now and the long-term effect of that. And I really think that we could do a lovely piece of work. And I think for me, the value of it is that it will go on and then it should help us really think about co-designing a better mental health response for the next decade for people in City and Hackney. And I think it really matters. And I'm particularly interested in how we're going to engage young peoples in this work, because I think that there's a lot that we could do better around our child and adolescent mental health service provision. So I'm so behind this. I want it to be utterly integrated, and I would really absolutely make the offer publicly, not just in the chat, of assisting with evaluation.
Thanks, Honour. Marianne.
Thank you, Chairman. I think this is a fantastic opportunity for us. We saw over COVID how important the voluntary sector was in reaching out to our communities. It's a missing gap, missing link that we currently have. The voluntary organisations are trusted within their communities. They've built the rapport. They're flexible. That's the important key issue. They're flexible. Sometimes we're not. But I'm always mindful that organisations start up on a piecemeal basis, in an informal basis, and then they lose their momentum because they have a lack of support. And I think this is something that will be great for the City of London. As Randall said, we have lots of informal groups. It's very time consuming and they need the support, and I think this will help them grow. Voluntary sector organisations always live hand to mouth. It's part of their DNA. That doesn't mean that they're not going to be successful or it fails. I think Jake is probably already looking for further funding, and it's a sort of partnership that City Bridge Trust has been building with the voluntary sector across London. It's something that we want to see organisations bolting together, supporting each other, dealing with that overlap, cutting the cost of administration amongst organisations. So I think this is a fantastic opportunity. It will provide us with that real key link into our communities, our service users, to help them buy into us and help us solve our problems, because they'll be actually communicating directly with us via this organisation. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity for us. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Marion. So I'm going to take those both as sort of comments and take another one now from John Williams.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, it's also a comment. I mean, I view this initiative as a major development around public involvement, because one of the things that, from a Health Watch perspective, is that the voluntary sector are a key partner in actually have given us that reach. So it's really important that we kind of think about how we do things differently from now on. And I think the Assembly is a different way of doing things, and an important way of doing things about building confidence and trust in the system as well. Because what we've seen over the last year really intensely is lack of trust in the institutions. So it's really important. So I think that we push this initiative forward. I appreciate all the conversations about the cost of it, the sustainability of it, but we have to do things differently now. And it's important that we show people we're doing things differently now. So I really do support this initiative and do hope it can take forward. Even if it isn't initially in a piecemeal way, it has to be taken forward.
Thanks, John.
Okay, thank you, John. And then Ida.
Okay, I just want to say, as a volunteer myself, giving so much time and effort, it's only been done because of the help of the voluntary sector, who have actually helped us to get our voices and represent our communities. So I think it's really key that we support this. Without us, there is no, statutory bodies can't meet the needs you have. So as volunteers helping, I think it helps. So you need to support this program.
Thank you, Ida. Right, I've still got some hands up, but I think they're sort of legacy from people who've just spoken. I guess Sonal's hand, you've just popped your hand up, and then I'm going to make a couple of comments myself.
Okay, so I'll be super quick, Mark. So, you at the beginning of the conversation said that we will be considering this proposal for endorsement. We just need to be mindful that we also need to take it through the CCG governance process and the Finance and Performance Subcommittee on the 24th. So there is that final check step internally to try and secure the funding. So just need to be mindful of that.
Thank you, Sonal. I think we should probably try and wrap up. I make a couple of comments, and then I'm going to ask David to make a comment about system sponsorship, and then see if Jake would or Liz wants to make a final comment as well. Then finish off. So I guess I'm still wondering a little bit about the governance and how the Assembly fits in, and being assured that expectations are managed efficiently, etc. I think there does need to be more work on that. We know there's more work to do on the evaluation and the funding. So I'm going to just really make a very quick comment like that. David, do you want to just maybe share some thoughts about the sponsorship role from the system and what that might look like? And is it a person or is it something else? I'm just thinking what we might be thinking about that.
I think Chris has helped crystallise some of possibly my thinking on this. Well, help Chris in terms of the work that Sonia Khan and others in the local authority, certainly in Hackney, are doing. And I need to pick up with Andrew and Randall and others about the city. But it might be that we look at some of the already good work that's happening around the VCS development within our local authorities, and who might be best placed as a member of the Integrated Care Partnership Board to potentially act as a system sponsor for this. It would need to probably be a manager and executive. But what I suggest, Mark, is I pick it up with you, Randall and Chris separately, and then we can discuss with Jake some of our thoughts when we've talked a bit more about it.
I think that seems sensible. We're not going to make a decision, hard and fast one here and now. So I think that's a helpful way forward. Jake, did you want to have any final comment?
No, I think all the comments have been really helpful for us. This has been long in gestation, and we'd be keen to pick up with David and colleagues outside the meeting, and with Chris and council colleagues about how it can work in practice and work alongside the council's efforts. So, really welcome the discussion. We've taken a note of all the comments, and hopefully, we can start to progress this from April so that we can show that the model works.
Okay, thank you. So I think we probably need to move on. So in terms of what we were asked in the paper to clearly we've noted the report and considered evaluation needs and considered the submissions for future business cases. So I think we can all agree we've done that. The next one is to endorse the actual award of the 300,000. And the final thing is to approve the role of assistant project sponsor. I think we would agree that we want one. It's just about how we work out how that would work. As David has said, is something we'll take outside the meeting. So I'm going to, I think, in terms of, say, for the City ICB board, to note, consider, I assume that's all fine. And I think probably approve the system sponsor. And are you happy to endorse the contract award for 300,000 subject to working on trying as much as possible the work that will go on with the FPC and the CCG's governing body and the processes that Sunil has just pointed out, and the fact that there is an element of risk here which we all have to live with, including Jake and his colleagues, in terms of moving forward into long-term funding, which is uncertain. So, are you happy, City ICB, to note, consider,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
endorse and approve, subject to those comments?
Yes.
Yes,
Yep.
subject to the comment. Yeah.
Okay. And then similarly, ditto, Hackney, note, consider, endorse and approve.
Indeed.
Yes.
Subject to comments.
Subject to the comments. Yeah. Okay. So we've got those. We'll have those in quite considerable detail, and then we'll move on with that outside of the meeting. So, Jake and colleagues, thank you very much for presenting. And and indeed, there's no doubt that the work of the voluntary sector is incredibly valuable and has been shown to be so during the course of COVID. If anyone was in any doubt before then, they can't be in it now. So I think let's hopefully end on a positive note in that way. And thank you for your time today.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Jake.
Thanks, colleagues.
Okay, let's move on to the evaluation framework. Has Anna joined us?
I have, yeah.
Anna, hi. Yeah, don't worry about that. You have -1 minute, but we shall leave it with the chair to try and wangle the time. So we'll let you speak for 5 minutes or so, and then we'll take a few questions. But we are asked to approve the content of the evaluation framework, so we need to be mindful of that when we discuss this.
Okay, I'll struggle with -1 minute, but I'll try and be as brief as I can. So we've had a contract in place since January 2017 with an alliance providers, Cordis Bright, PPL Consulting and COBIC. They have conducted some work so far for us that's listed within the paper. We have had several kind of changes of direction. We've had overarching evaluation questions really about what do we need for successful integration? How much have we managed that within City and Hackney so far? What is there still to do? But actually, they've then helped us in getting kind of workstream logic models, and they supported with the outcomes framework. And they've done rapid evidence assessments and a literature review on successful factors for integration so far. So where we are now is they're moving into the final phase of the evaluation. And so I'm bringing their proposal for the final phase to the ICB for approval. We've agreed there will be 3 components to the final evaluation. One of them is, as I say, evaluation of the overall integrated care partnership in City and Hackney. What does that look like now? Where is that? How has that journey looked from 2016 onwards? What are the steps within that, and why were key decisions made when they were? And what have we learned during that journey? What has changed during the pandemic in terms of how we work together, and what can we learn from that? What now is working quite well and what isn't working as well, and how mature are we as a system in terms of integrated working? The second section of the final evaluation is a detailed review into neighbourhoods. So echoing the one done for the overall integrated care partnership to say, yeah, where are we with the neighbourhoods programme? and what is working well and what isn't, and how has that developed, including some discussion about the neighbourhoods and primary care networks and the interaction between those. And then to try and develop a theory of change for the programme overall. There's a lot of discussion about the future impact of neighbourhoods and what it would mean for us in terms of outcomes for residents if we'd worked at a more neighbourhood level, and to try and set out what that needs to happen in order for us to see that change in outcomes. And then also for them to work on a specific kind of service level theory of change as well, noting that at the moment the neighbourhoods programme contains a number of quite disparate projects. And then we wanted some economic evaluation that is at service level, so probably then within each of the what were work streams, and we'd have conversations about what the most helpful services to develop to do economic evaluations on would be. You've got some details there about methodology as well, which would include review of documentation, consultation and interviews and focus groups with senior leaders, workstream staff and focus groups with patients and residents. Then the economic evaluation will depend on what we deem as reasonable services to share learning from and what data we have available. You've also got there a summary of outputs. So they will be starting as soon as ICB have approved the framework, and plan to go on then until probably the summer this year, depending on there might be a bit of constraint about capacity of service partners to take this on. But yes, I'm probably going to stop talking there, and I'm happy to take questions if people have them.
Great, thanks, Anna. That was really helpful. I've got John's hand up, and then Helen Venterman. John, I think there was a legacy handoff's gone down. Helen.
Yes, thank you, and thanks very much for the paper, and there is a lot of detail in it. I raised some questions about evaluation at the last ICB, and to be honest, I don't really see anything in this paper that's quite taken account of that. Specifically, I think what I was getting at last time we talked about this was something that was much more specific about outcomes. This paper talks a lot about behaviours and processes and theories, but I'm still looking for something that's a bit more tangible, a bit more specific. And I don't think that's there yet. And I guess this is a sort of an example of something, which is it talks about the economic evaluation. Frankly, I don't really know what that means. Does it mean that it's value for money? Does it mean that there are specific health improvements as a consequence of investment? Does it mean that we're looking at the relative investment in a range of services and trying to compare one to another to get the best value for money? So it's helpful for me in that it raises a lot more questions, but it's not helpful in that I don't see many answers from last meeting to this meeting.
Do you want me to come back on that now?
Yes,
Mark?
Anna. Yeah, please.
Okay.
There aren't any other hands just at the moment. Yeah, you go.
So thank you, Helen. They are good questions. I agree with you about outcomes, and as I say, the evaluation team did help us to produce logic models for the programmes, for the specific programme areas that looked at what they're doing and what outcomes they were planning on impacting on. And I think that's probably one bit that I think the outcomes framework would then facilitate us being able to say, what do we think has changed because of our integration of the programme? How much can we attribute to integration of the programme, and how has that changed over time? So we had an outcomes framework that we nearly got kind of past the end stage of being able to use it, in that it was approved by the ICB just before the pandemic got us at the end of March. So there is a piece that we need to do about refreshing that and making sure that that is embedded in local work that I think would answer some of your questions about wanting some specifics of what is different in terms of outcomes for residents. If not, we can definitely have a conversation outside if there's something that you wanted more than that. The economic evaluations would be to compare what is different because of integration of particular services. So would be saying what are we spending on an integrated service that would be compared to not having that service in place, and what difference has that made? So would be looking at what changes in outcomes and investment have we seen because of integration, and what can we learn from that we could apply to other services. But again, if there was something specific that you wanted to follow up on, I'd be happy to have a conversation outside.
Thanks, Anna. I've got Randall and Honor. So Randall.
Thank you. I must say, this confused me in a variety of ways. One was, one would think that there'd be some suggestion of what it's going to cost to do this. But more importantly, by the time we get this report, we hopefully will have actually stood up the neighborhoods in some functioning way. So I'm having a somewhat hard time understanding what we're trying to accomplish with this. I mean, it seems to me this done 6 months ago might have been far more helpful than it might be now. So I'm sorry to sort of miss the point here, but does that make any sense to anyone?
It makes lots of sense, Randall. Yes, indeed. The learning would have been good if we'd had it as we went along a bit more. But I'm sure Anna.
And does it make sense to even spend money getting it at this point, or does it make more sense to do what we think we're going to do and then evaluate it? So
I think Honnor's trying to come in. So
yeah, Honor.
You're on mute, Honor.
I've been observing the meeting protocol. I don't think Anna should have to hold this and defend this, because this was something the CCG imagined about 4 years ago, and we were very interested in thinking about the benefits of integration. We were also interested in having a piece of work that would show the world, not just ourselves, that when you change a system, it costs a lot of money and you may not get anything better out of it, because we are always offered the idea that moving the deck chairs will produce infinitely better benefit, and we are sceptical, and I think that we're right to be sceptical. So from that, we wanted to have a piece of work that told us something specific about our own system, and we would have something to offer to the world the next time a huge organisation, institutional change was offered. We would have something to point to. We were a bit guided by Manchester, which was very helpful, but this was very locally owned. We could not have imagined the pace of change. Well, maybe other people could have imagined. I could never have imagined the pace of change that we would end up here. So what Anna is doing is carrying on a piece of work whose story began 3 or 4 years ago. And out of it, at each time there's been a significant shift and change, we've had to rescope and represent, because the evaluation could not have carried on in this format that it was originally designed to do. Nevertheless, it has already told us very useful things. And I do believe, and I think it would be incredibly useful to speak with Helen and involve her in the planning group, perhaps, Anna, to think about some of the economic evaluations, not least because we've just had a conversation with Jake and CVS and our third and voluntary sector about their contribution into the neighbourhoods. And these two things have got to tie up so completely as to be one and the same, using different strands of cash, but to tell the same story from different sides. So I want to defend, absolutely not Anna needs me to defend her, she's perfectly able to do it herself, but I think this is a hugely significant piece of work. Our job is to make sure that we land it so that it remains as helpful as it possibly can be for us.
Yeah, we can't ignore the fact that circumstances have, as you said, we have to keep sort of reviewing it and reshaping it in the light of events, as it were. David, your hand popped up as well.
I think Honor's made the point that I was going to make. It's an ongoing, iterative piece of work, but we committed to it some time ago. And just to emphasise Anna's point, that which Helen won't have been aware of, so I think she may have joined after this, but we did do a quite intensive, almost year-long piece of work on establishing the outcome framework for the system, which, as Anna says, we just need to refresh in the context of post-COVID, which we can do.
Yeah, and indeed, not only we committed to it, we committed the funding of it.
Yeah. So
we now need to think about evaluation going into the future, but this piece of work needs to be concluded. Chris, you've got your hand up. You're on mute, Chris.
Sorry, I put my hand down rather than turning my mic on. I wanted to support what Honor was saying and just say I think this can be really useful in terms of looking at future pieces of work, especially in certain areas of social care. I think there's a point at where hospital discharge meets adult social care, where I think we can get benefit from more integration, and learning from previous bits of integration is essential to getting that right. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Sonal, you got your hand up, and then Honor again. Sonal.
Apologies for that. Thanks, Mark. Anna, thank you for this piece of work, and I completely understand where it's coming from. In terms of the question, in terms of how this is being funded, am I right in assuming that it is funded from the money that was earmarked for this piece of work from a couple of years ago, and it's just the underspend from that we're using going forward? So it's not an increased or an additional cost pressure, is my understanding.
No, there was a cash envelope agreed, and it's absolutely within that. It was just paused during the pandemic for people to do other things.
Okay, so that's fine. And secondly, the neighbourhoods programme was reviewed by the Finance and Performance Subcommittee a short while ago, and we were very interested in this piece of work and understanding the economic evaluation of this. So I'd very much like to pick this up with you after the ICB to talk about that from this as a result of the discussions that took place at the FPC. So just sort of input into that as well.
Great. Anna, can I just you talk about the evaluation group working on this? Can you just remind us who is that group? What is the group?
So it's a steering group so it is me, Jane Taylor from Public Health, David, Honor, Anne Sanders from a PPI perspective, Lee Walker from a contracts perspective. We had invited patient rep, but that hadn't worked out. But yes, I will approach Helen afterwards. I think that would be a helpful input in however she can manage.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you. It's good just to remind ourselves it's held in that way and can be shaped by that group of wise people. Okay, so I think there's it's true. Councillor Bramble, do you want to have the last word, and then we'll need to move on?
Thank you, Chair. Now, just to quickly say, as we've committed to it, we've just got to build in a bit of flexibility how we respond to the changes to make the system work for us in terms of the evaluation process. But I think that as we've already committed, it will just undo some of the work that's been done. It just needs updating, in my view. Thank you, Chair.
Sure. So in terms of what we're presented with in terms of the evaluation framework moving on, I just want to see if we are happy to approve that. Any last comments or thoughts? No other hands going up? No. So can I ask the City ICB to approve the evaluation framework subject to the sort of ongoing work and shaping that we've just described by that subgroup? Yep, thanks. And Hackney ICB, ditto?
Approved.
Thank you very much. Lovely. So in terms of examples of integration and working together in different ways, our next item is the Housing First update. I think, Siobhan, you're going to just give us some of the headlines on that impressive work. We're asked to note the report.
Yeah, I don't propose, given the time as well, I don't propose to go into huge detail. It really was just to, because I know there was a lot of interest in this service from members when we first commissioned it, and I just wanted to give an update on how the service has got going, and also the agreement we've reached as partners around continuing to fund it, as you know, as an example of our partnership working really, and that we have secured as 3 organisations funding for another 2 years to continue with what has been a really quite impressive start to the service, in the sense that I guess it really was one of the kind of benefits from the pandemic, really, in the sense that we were able to quite quickly mobilise around street and rough sleepers, and we have managed to get this service off the ground and to accommodate some people and provide the wraparound support that the Housing First team offer, and they have done really well to do that. I think within the first lockdown period they were able to get mobilised and start the service, and what we would like to do, I guess, because of that, again, in the sense of evaluation, although there is a lot of international and national valuations of this model being effective already, we would like to build that in now around the subsequent 2 years with some public health support from our local team, in order to hopefully secure the resource on an ongoing basis by really evidencing its impact and outcomes. And that was really the purpose of the paper coming to you today. So happy to take any questions or any comments.
Yeah, no, that's great, and it's a really good read, so thank you very much for the paper. Councillor Rebecca Ranson, you have your hand up.
I do, and it's a very quick question, because also this is fantastic news and great to hear about the extension. And I remember conversations previously, that was always a concern, that to get it going for 1 year and then what would happen next. So that's all really positive to hear. I was just interested to find out a bit more about pathways and the cohort we're working with. So it was always going to be a challenge. That is absolutely fantastic. We've got it up and running, but we're quite limited numbers. And so just from experience, are we seeing it as rough sleepers coming straight in from being on the street into Housing First? Or I know there were some conversations early on where we were looking at that sort of very vulnerable cohort right on the edge of rough sleeping, and whether this might work for some of those. If possible, just to share a bit more about how we're finding that work in practice, I'd be really interested to hear.
Thank you. Did you, when you said pathway, do you mean the new pathway service model, or do you mean just generalised pathways?
Oh, yeah, you've got to be careful of language.
I know.
Literally, in this case, the pathway into Housing First. So how people are being referred in, where the referrals are coming from. So again, I know early on, it's such a fantastic service of option to have. There's a lot of interest from a lot of different services, and how we're going to balance that out, and how we're going to work out which of those that might benefit from the service do get referred in and access it, and so forth.
So at the moment, that's managed. Originally, it was managed through partner organisations, and we had a panel meeting really, where referrals were brought together from all the interested provider organisations or partner organisations, and they were discussed as with the Housing First provider. But that's now a process that's sort of being much more managed by the provider, St Mungo's themselves, and they are coming from a number of places, and they are really, it's about the kind of entrenched nature of the person's difficulties, and you know, the fact that they maybe have found it difficult to navigate and stabilise themselves through a traditional pathway, and so that's much more the focus of the criteria, if you like, rather than necessarily you can only be a street rough sleeper. It's much more about how the person has presented and some of their ongoing difficulties, and so they could be in a variety of existing pathways or services, and so that flexibility is already built into the process.
Brilliant, thank you. Thanks, Sean. That's very reassuring. Any other hands? I can't see any. Rebecca's got her hand up still. Okay. Well, I think that I would take lack of hands not as any other sign than one of contentment. I think it's really good paper, and it's really, really great work. So, Sean, thank you so much for your involvement in it, and thank you for bringing the update to us.
Thank you.
Cheers then. Take care. Bye. So moving on, we have the finance update. We only have 5 minutes against this item, so we have made up a bit of time, but nonetheless, we might need a little bit more than 5. Am I looking to use Sunil or Ian? I'm not sure, to present some of the headlines.
So Ian and myself will do a double act on this. With your permission, I'll give a very brief upview on the City and Hackney position, and then pass over to Ian to provide the LBH update. Mindful of time, so I'm not going to concentrate on the presentation deck specifically, but just to update the ICB that in recent months the CCG had declared a £7.5 million deficit, but I'd informed the ICB that we were working on mitigations to manage that deficit position down. We subsequently moved the deficit to around £3 million, and as of this month, month 10, not month 9, the CCG has moved into a break-even position and is planning on holding that position to the end of the financial year. That is as a result of sort of collective working across the North East London system and identifying a number of mitigations which have allowed us to deliver that position. So regardless of what it says in the presentation slide, we are delivering a break-even position as at month 10, not month 9. And that is our go-forward position until the end of the year. An updated report will be presented to the ICP next month. I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, there are not immediate hands up, so let's go over to you, Ian.
Great stuff, and thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. So the position in terms of the Council's latest outturn is, as we all expect, it's continuing to be very challenging. This year has been unprecedented in terms of the financial pressures that all local authorities have been under, and you'll have seen the article, I'm sure, on the BBC News website only yesterday about 4 local authorities receiving extra support for the financial difficulties they have. Obviously, we're not one of those because of the way that we've consistently managed our finances now over many years. But for the current year, we are forecasting an overspend of just under £7 million, of which a significant chunk of that relates to COVID-19 expenditure. You won't be surprised to hear. And it includes things like significant investment supporting the market through uplifts to care providers, additional staffing and PPE costs. We also have got some other overspends which we're not classifying as COVID related, predominantly driven by care package costs in LD, physical and sensory. But again, we're looking to manage that position in the current financial year, and given where we are in the financial cycle, attention is now very much turned to next year's budget, and on Friday the Council will be publishing its budget proposals for next financial year, so that's 21-22, and I'm very happy to do an update at the next meeting setting out exactly what the Council will be doing in relation to next year's budget in terms of where we're going with council tax, but also the significant investments we'll be continuing to make in what is still a very challenging financial environment. So happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Ian. We've got a Haren, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thanks, Mark. I have a quick question for Sunil. Sunil, in your paper, there is a slight overspend on primary care budget. So can you just tell us around which area, and there is some underspend on LES as well. So need to understand a bit more of those two.
Yeah, so the primary care overspend is offset by by a budget that sits within the reserves budget line of the CCG. So there's a netting off. So that overspend is presentational, but is not a real primary care overspend. So primary care will not overspend this year. It's just presentational, and the LES's figure is down to timing. So all of that is monitored, Haren, and will not impact on the program of delivery of work in this financial year.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Can I ask Ian a question in terms of sort of mitigations for the situation the local authority finds itself in? Will you get extra money for these COVID costs?
So we have been receiving not insignificant sums of money in terms of COVID costs. We've received now 4 tranches of payments in relation to COVID monies, totaling just over £32 million. But of course, those aren't just for costs relating to social care. There are costs related to a whole raft of our activities. For example, the impact of leisure centres being closed. There's also been, colleagues on the call may recall when we did a presentation a few months ago now about the ways that local authorities are being supported through COVID. There's effectively a real patchwork quilt of different pots of money that we're getting, and I've produced a paper for cabinet members on all of those and how we're using them. So we're obviously lobbying as always to try and get extra money, but what ultimately there will need at some point to be a reconciliation where we'll have to draw down on some of our own resources to fund some of these costs. But we're doing our best to make sure we manage within the resources we've got and mitigate spend where we can.
Sure. And I guess the other question is the impact potentially on the system of the financial situation you're in terms of how you mitigate the situation you're in.
I think that's absolutely right. And it's why I'm very happy to bring back a paper on next year's budget so that colleagues are all aware of just how that's all shaping up and the future horizons as well, because I think that's what people are also interested in, isn't it? We all expect there to be costs relating to COVID that stretch well beyond, if you like, whatever the life of this pandemic will be, because there'll have been things that will have happened over the course of the year that will have a legacy cost that will take a long time to work through.
Indeed. Thank you. Thanks, Ian. Good. Okay. Thank you, Jake. It's a very positive comment in the chat about strong financial management, which is reassuring and impressive, Sonal and Ian. So thank you for that, Jake. I just can't see any more hands, so I think probably we should move on then at that point. So thank you, Ian and Sonal. So we now move on to the risk register, the workstream program risk registers. Matt's on the call, I'm sure, to do an introductory piece, but also I kind of looking to Randall to share some thoughts on this as our ICB risk champion. I think I think champion is still the phrase, I think. But anyway, Randall, we know that you have your lead role in the risk register overview for the ICB. Matt, did you want to start off with any comments, or should we turn to Randall?
The only thing I would flag is page 75 of the circulated papers does summarise the changes. There are a lot this month, so I would suggest if anybody has queries to go through them on a risk by risk basis. Almost all work streams are reporting Q4 based risks now. Planned care are reporting for Q3, but we do also have detailed risk breakdowns for each work stream in the circulated papers.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Randall.
Sorry. Yeah, I was particularly pleased to see that we finally had some change in this. I think, I do really appreciate that everybody's, running very hard just to try to stay in place. But that's when we really have to pay attention to what the risks are. And I think that, this is some actual progress on that. So I'm quite happy with the work that's been done, and thank you all for doing it. I do think maybe people know something I don't, but I thought the CCG merger was pretty much a done deal, so I'm a bit unclear on why that's a red risk. Is there something under the surface that I don't understand?
Can you just show us the page specifically, Randall? I'll need to reread it.
I'm sorry, it's in the operating model section.
So this is risk icon 1 on page 79.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Chair, do you want me to speak to this? It's Carol.
Yes, Carol, go on then.
Well, that risk was put in there in the autumn, I believe, just in case the NHS England or London decided to say, actually, no, the merger, we're going to defer the date from the 1st of April, and that was a real possibility in the autumn. As we approach April, it isn't. And also the fact that the pandemic was at a certain stage, there was a possibility that we just didn't have capacity to deal with it. So yeah, as we sit here in February, it feels like a done deal, but it didn't feel like that when that risk was put on the risk register.
But I assume that means that we'll evaluate it and take it down from there.
I think we could close it.
That'd be even better.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's the risk there is it's going to be paused, but it's not going to be paused. So as it's stated, it should be closed, I think. Chris, I've got your hand up. I think, yes. Can't hear you, Chris.
Sorry, is that better?
Yep, that's it.
Sorry, it was on that risk, and I'm wondering whether we don't actually take it down, given that I don't feel quite clear, and I'm not sure how many other people in this meeting feel clear about exactly what the operational procedures will be in terms of once we move in April to be an ICPB, and once you've got the Neighbourhood Health and Care Board, and we're losing Jane. She's going to Devon at some point, and we're losing David. He's going to Northampton at some point. And I just wanted a sort of quick heads up on where we're at in terms of those organisational structures. Because I think at the moment with SOCG, there's a point where SOCG will kind of morph possibly into something that looks a bit more like the Neighbourhood Health and Care Board, but exactly when does that happen? And the technical legal responsibility for taking decisions, I believe, rests with the single CCG, but is devolved down to our area, City and Hackney board. But I would need reminding who's even on that board, and does that all kick in April? Sorry, a lot of questions.
Sure, which is a different set of risks in a way. As
yeah,
Carol or David's first. Okay.
Yeah, sorry if you called me to this and I wasn't there. I had to take a call. I mean, I think much of this is kind of the content that we would aim to be covering in the March development session on the 16th in terms of the wiring under the board for how we're going to function and operate. What that means in terms of the risk. I guess I don't have. I mean, it's fine for it to stay on. It's a work in progress through development, and we can ratchet down the risk as we see it as we go through that development process, or it can close. Yeah, I don't have a strong view one way or the other.
Okay, Carol.
Yeah, can I comment on this? If you go to the detail, there's a risk 13 which for some reason didn't make the pack, which actually describes everything that Chris talked about. It's in the details on page, it's the last detail, so that would be page 93, but on your shortened risk register, it's not there. And that is, I think, summarises some of what Chris said.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. So I would change my request just to putting it on the shortened list, please.
Yeah, it was there when I sent it in. I don't know. I think it might be a cut and paste job.
Yeah. So let's close the one in terms of just stating the pause, because there isn't going to be a pause, and make sure that's where it needs to be.
Yes.
Okay. Randall.
I was going to say what Carol already said. So thank you. I completely agree with Chris that there is a real risk there that we need to focus on, but it is outlined. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, do members have any other comments on the risk register or various mitigations that they describe? I've got Matt Hopkinson just popped up with his hand.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just one thing to point out on the Children, Young People, Maternity and Families Risk Register, which is that risk 19 around pressure on CAMS services was discussed at the CYPMF Strategic Oversight Group last week, and they've agreed that it should be rated red. On this report, it's still on a 12. It's being escalated because there is significant pressure across North East London CAMS services. There's a briefing note that went to the SMT at Nelka last week from Greg Condon, and that can be shared with members of the ICB if that would be helpful. It sets out some immediate and longer term recommendations and work being done to mitigate the risk. But there is increased demand on those services due to the pandemic.
Sure. Happy for you to share the paper with the details, but ultimately, just, you know, as Randall says, it's good to see the risks being refreshed in an active way regularly. So it's about making sure that that risk is the narrative, is the mitigation narrative is changed in the light of what you just said, as well as circulating the paper. So, so it stays contemporary. Honor, you've put in the chat about the white paper, which is being published today. Did you want to articulate that?
Not really. I just think that health is a restless entity and will always be subject to change. And whilst we might welcome what we see there, it could present us with challenges which indeed should perhaps be articulated as a risk.
Indeed. Well, we've seen leaked versions, but we should see it today. So I suppose we'll come back to that next time. Okay. Okay, right. So Sean's just made a comment about one of the other risks about something needing to be picked up. I've got one hand up still. Matthew, that's your hand again. So I don't see any other hands. So I guess we're here to note the registers. It's good to see the lots of updates and changes and things. So I do welcome that to echo Randall's point. So shall we just go to the City ICB? Happy to note the risk register. And Hackney ICB also noted.
Yeah, noted.
Cheers. Thank you very much, everyone. Well, in fact, yeah. So we've actually finished early, which was surprising at 11 o'clock. But I think we had enough time to do what we needed to do with the rest of our agenda. Any AOBs? Councillor Bramble.
Thank you, Chair. No, it was just to thank the voluntary sector really for all that they're doing as well. I know I thanked other colleagues, but also to thank them in their part in all what we're doing around responding to COVID and trying to encourage people to get vaccinated. So just to acknowledge that, Chair, and just thank you for chairing a productive meeting.
Oh, thank you very much. Any more reflections? I'm happy to end on that point. I'm sure there are. Anna.
Thank you. Just in terms of reflection and just to pick up from Councillor Bramble, really, I think there is something about gratitude that we should be thinking about. And I suppose I've been thinking about, you know, the vaccine hesitant have sort of threaded their way throughout our thinking today, and thinking about all the hesitations that there are around engaging with the things we'd like people to engage with. And I wonder if we couldn't also think about how the system rewards our populations and our workforce for the work that they do, because we've been very full of thanks today. Because I think these very human attributes are the things that help people be supported in very hard times. I think we've looked at really interesting papers today, I think, and they've all been part of the conversation about how we do the best that we can do, and how do we know that we've done the best that we can do. Really, those have been the themes. And I think what's been interesting for me about the ICB is about how ready it has been to engage with those questions. And I think these meetings, even though we finished early, like Mark said, I think we've had a good conversation about the important things that mattered.
Thanks, Honor. Helen, you have your hand up as well.
Yes, thank you. It's following on from Honor's comments, I think, because I think we have had some very healthy debate and discussion today on a number of really important issues, and I would hope that the challenges that we make in this meeting are not seen to be any lack of appreciation of the work that's undertaken across the sector, whether it's voluntary sector, statutory sector, wherever it comes from. I think the purpose of the honesty and the frankness in meetings like this is to try to build on what's already been done and to make it that bit better and to push that much harder for something something positive. So I think the challenge is positive and healthy, and not at all intended to be overly critical or undermining what fantastic work is already being done. So just to be clear about constructive challenge, I hope, not a lack of appreciation.
Sure, thanks, Helen. Honor, you put your hand down and then it went up again. Did you have a further thought?
Me, no.
No, sorry, Helen, I meant Honor. Sorry.
No,
Helen.
I'm lowering my hand.
It was Honor's hand went up and down. I echo that. I think obviously it's different when you're presenting and receiving the feedback, but I hope people just realise that it is coming from a good place, an appreciative place, because the work is really, really impressive here. And I think it's a, as we've said before, a testament to our relationships that we can have these difficult conversations. We need to have, so we need to get into places and we need to push harder, as Helen says, and seek better things for our population. So I've always struck by how well that sort of functions from my perspective sitting here in terms of the process and how people kind of respond to challenge and conversation. And I hope, Jake, I can just see your hand. Obviously, the paper you brought to us today was the biggest piece of work we did. And I hope you do go away feeling appreciated. That's kind of you to put your thumb up. Thank you, because it's great. And the feedback is, coming, as I say, coming from the right sort of places. Okay, well, I think enough, unless anyone else wants to add a final thought. Shall we enjoy the extra 15 minutes then? Take care, everybody. Good to see you all. See you soon. Bye.
Thanks, man. Well done. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Chair.